Hi there. So the last story we read, or the last chapter we read in our Miss Jane Pittman was two letters from Kansas. And Jane had been saying to Joe that she needed to stay on the plantation until she heard from Ned. And he agreed to that. And so in the meantime, he was looking for a new plantation for them to go. And they do find it. And eventually they do get they get two letters from Ned. So Ned didn't want to have any trouble brought on Jane. And so he has somebody send the letters. And the guy forgot about them. And then he had to get in touch with Ned. And so the letters finally got to Jane, right? So that's where we left off. So, in this chapter, we're on page 83, Another Home. Joe Pittman found a place near Louisiana-Texas borderline where he could break horses, right? So we know that breaking horses means to train them. And so you ride the horse until the horse realizes that he's no longer in control. So that's kind of what breaking a horse is. He knew all about breaking horses and branding cattle. He had learned that on Colonel Dye's. But now he wanted to go where he could make a better living. After we had talked it over, just me and him, he went up to the house to tell Colonel Dye he wanted to leave. Colonel Dye was old and wrinkled now, but ornery still. Not just ornery, he was losing his mind. Once every year, he used to put on his Seckish uniform and ride to Alexandria. 2 or 3 days later, he would come back. Looked like every time he went and came back, he was more and more crazy. Sometimes he used to gather us all at the house just to look at us. After he had looked at us for about a minute, he would tell us to go back. One time, he called us up there, and by the time we got there, he'd forgot he had sent for us. "What y'all doing here?" he asked. "You sent for them, Pa," one of his boys said. "Well, I'm sending them back, right on back." He said, "Get out of here, go back to work." When Joe went up there that day and told him he wanted to leave, he said, "What's the matter? I ain't been treating you right?" Joe told him it wasn't that. He had been treated very good there, but he wanted to go out and do a little sharecropping of his own. He wouldn't dare tell the colonel he wanted to go break horses for more money. He told him sharecropping. Colonel Dye told Joe that he would pay the family $5 more a month if he stayed. Joe shook his head. Nope. He wanted to go and do little sharecropping. The colonel said, "Listen, Joe, I'll turn over a piece of that good bottom land to you, and you work it like you want." This was the first time Colonel Dye had offered anybody a piece of land on his place. He had said before that this was the last thing he would ever do. Joe knew this before he went up there, and that's why he went up there saying sharecropping. He said the old colonel looked at him like he was losing his best friend. "You're a good man, Joe. I need you here to mind my stock. My children around here are too lazy to do a thing, and there ain't no other in this place that can tell you a cow from a hog." Joe shook his head. "I like to sharecrop." Now, the old colonel got mad, acting like he was losing his best friend. Next second, he was blazing mad. "All right, if you want to go sharecrop, he said. Joe thanked him and turned to go. "Just a minute." The colonel said. Joe stopped and looked at him. "Ain't you forgetting something?" "Sir?" Joe said. "My $150, the colonel said. "What $150, Joe said. "The $150 that get you out of trouble with the clucks you had," the colonel said. "You forgot that?" It was true. Joe Pittman had been mixed up in little politics just after the war, and everybody came around here knew it. The clucks had got after him, and the colonel had spoke out. But at that time, nothing was mentioned about money. "I didn't know you paid," Joe said. "Cluxes don't stop killing it just because you say hold it," the colonel said. "Now you pay me my $150 or get away from my door." Joe came back and told me what had happened. We sat up all night trying to think what we ought to do next. Joe was set on leaving, no holding back, but he couldn't leave and not pay Colonel Dye his money. He knowed he didn't owe Colonel Dye any money, but how could he prove it? the Freedom Bureau once, but they wasn't there no more. We stayed up all night. Then we both said that Joe ought to go see if he couldn't borrow the money from the new man he was going to work for. For day the next morning, Joe packed a lunch and started out on foot with 100 miles to go. Somebody told Colonel Dye he was missing. Colonel Dye came out in the field and asked me where was. Gone look for your money, I said. The old colonel got mad at first, saying what he was going to do to Joe when he got back. But then he started laughing. Where could I get $150 from? He rode away laughing. A couple weeks later, Joe came back. Walked almost to Texas, rode a horse all the way back. He left the horse tied in the swamps, scared Colonel Dye might accuse him of stealing it. Then he went up to the house and he knocked. Colonel Banks, come here. Sorry. Colonel Dye might accuse him of stealing it. So he went up to the door and he knocked. Colonel Dye came to the back door chewing. Had been sitting at the table eating. Where you been? He said. Don't you know the mules out there are hungry? Want me to come in that yard with my stick? Joe handed him the money. Shh. Colonel Dye wouldn't take it at first, like it was Confederate money. Then he took it, looked at it, then he looked at Joe, then at the money. Then he wiped his mouth and counted the money. Look like it's all here, but the interest, he said. Time lapse between loaner and loanee come to about $30. Well, Joe came back and told me he owed Colonel Dye even more money. I've been getting money from Ned, and what I had saved for my wages came out to about $25. Banks, sit. But we needed $5 more. So here we go, up and down the quarters, selling the little furniture we had. I think we got about $1.50 for everything. Joe had an old shotgun. He sold that, another $1. We tried to sell our clothes, but nobody wanted those. We had a pig we was going to take with us, but we needed $2 now. Joe stuck the pig in a sack and started up and down the quarters again. After he had sold the pig, he took the money to Colonel Dye, and Colonel stood in the back door counting the money. When he saw it was there, he started to shut the back door and go back inside. But he saw Joe still out there in the yard. Well, he said. Mr. Clyde said, be sure to bring a receipt, Joe said. He said he don't want to have to come this far south for a piece of paper. Colonel Dye went back inside and wrote that he had received $150. Shh. He didn't say a thing about the extra $30. He came to the back door and throwed the piece of paper on the ground. Don't let the sun set on you anywhere near my place, he said. Joe came back and told me and the girls to get ready. The two girls was called Ella and Clara. Ella, the oldest one, and Clara, the youngest one, and looked just like Joe. After we had got everything we was going to take with us, Joe led us back to the swamps. Ella and Clara got on the horse with the bundle, and me and Joe walked in front. I asked Joe how come he got the money so easy. He said it wasn't easy. Some colored men he had met had to speak up for him. Then he had to prove to Mr. Clyde he was good as he was. Clyde picked one of the wildest horses he had. He broke the horse, true, but he was so stoved up he had to lay up a while before he could start back home. So he must have been like injured or maybe like pulled muscles, really kind of wiped out after doing it. It took us about 10 days to reach Clyde's place. We traveled the swamps all the time for fear the secret groups might see us and attack us for leaving Colonel Dye's place. We ran out of food 4 days out, and from then on we ate what we could find. Corn, potatoes. If Joe was lucky, he might kill a possum, or if we came up to a bayou, we might catch a fish or two. We ate anything we could get. We met people, black and white, but they saw us on the move and wouldn't have nothing to do with us. We came up to Clyde's place about 5 one evening. Clyde and his men had been killing hogs, and when we came up, the men was standing in the yard talking. Clyde told Joe to take us to the back and tell the woman in the kitchen to give us a good feeding. I could smell that good hog meat from way across the yard. The woman was making hog head cheese and blood pudding. They handed us a big pan of food, and we found a clean spot on the ground to sit down. When we got through, almost too full to move, we went back round the house. Mr. Clyde told Joe he wouldn't need him till Monday, so Joe could take us on home. The cabin wasn't much bigger than the one we had left, but we had made a new start and everything looked right smart better. After the children went to bed, me and Joe sat at the fire half talking. So a fire half's just a fireplace. We were so proud we had moved, so happy for the good meal we got as soon as we got there. Every time we looked at each other, we had to grin. Feet sore, back still hurting, but grinning there like two children courting for the first time. We tried to keep from looking at each other. I looked at the fire half, Joe looked at the door. Then I looked at the door, Joe looked at the fire half. When we couldn't find nowhere else to look, we looked at each other and grinned. No touching, no patting each other on the knee, just grinning. So in this chapter, Joe really has to go through a lot in order to be able to leave Colonel Dye's plantation, right? And so if you're in a journal, you could journal sometime in your life when you had to do something that was really, really difficult, but you knew that it was the right thing to do. And it could be anything, moving, experiencing something, whatever it was. Sometimes I think about when we have a lot of work to do and we're getting ready for finals and, maybe we have work to make up and we're just like, if I just get this done, I'll be done with this class. And I kind of feel that way when I look at Joe. He wants so badly to get out of Colonel Dye's plantation because he wants to make a life for himself. And, I think he thinks the same way that we do. Like, if I just get all this work done, I'll take the final and I'll be done with it. And he's thinking the same thing. If I can just get that $150 or, even after he gives him the money and he's like, oh no, I need $30 more. You're just like, all right, we'll be done with this if I just get the $30 more and give it to him. And so you certainly can write a journal entry about that. You could write about just all the risks that Joe has to take, He needed people to help him to get to the other plantation so that, patrollers didn't come out there and kill him. Life wasn't easy for these people at all. Like, I know it's hard for you to think to it because you guys have so many chances today. I mean, even more chances than like I had. And I was just a girl, but you guys have so many opportunities, so many doors have been open for you. And, I did a paper the other night on the LGBTQ people and how, so many don't realize just all the difficulties that they've been through. And I was writing about that and, this, I think he was a deacon. His last name was Robinson. He was talking about, he was the first gay deacon in New Hampshire, but he was talking about just all the people that died for that cause, and so that you could have those freedoms today and not be treated or beaten or killed. I wrote about Matthew Shepard, who he was horribly killed just because he was gay. And, I look at all these stories and I go back to when slaves became free, because they're almost like that first group who had to endure so much, and so many died and so many suffered in order to get those civil rights. And we look at the gay community and everything that they've been through. And, and in thinking about the pandemic that we're going through, Dr. Fauci is the same person. He's been on the president's committee since Ronald Reagan, who was the first president I voted for. And so he was the doctor during the AIDS epidemic. And I remember the AIDS epidemic, and it was sort of like this, but so much worse. Gays were so mistreated during that time, and it was just such a horrible, horrible time. And I think about all those events that our LGBTQ people had to go through in order for you today, people today, to be able to just have the same rights that we have. So I want you to think about those things when you're doing your journal entry, because all of those are examples of exactly what Joe had to go through to get off Colonel Dye's plantation and move to the next one. So, and the next one is Clyde plantation. So they sound the same, but they're different plantations. So I think that you should do a journal entry, and then I'll see you right back here for the next chapter.